The Nashville Predators are playing a little better as of late, but there's still a long way to go for them to get into playoff contention. They also had a very special hockey player make his NHL debut. We've got all that and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Predators, and Kimmel. And it's been a little better for the Predators after a very rough start. What has been the big difference over the last 5 or 6 games, especially where they're starting to play a little bit more cohesively?
Well, there was nowhere to go but up, Gil, because the season was really, really a rough start for the Nashville Predators. But I think the thing that is making the biggest difference in them finally finding a little bit of a groove is that their best players have started playing like they are their best players. And that was really a struggle in the start. Of course, they added Jonathan Marchessault. They added Steven Stamkos to the roster in the offseason, but it took Marchessault and Stamkos a long time to really get up to speed, to understand the system, to build some chemistry. What you're seeing now is that chemistry finally translating into some success on the ice for them. Jonathan Marchessault in his last 12 games has 9 goals and 16 points. In his first 12 games of the season, he only had 2 goals and 7 points. Very similar numbers for Steven Stamkos. Right now, his last 12 games, he's averaging a point per game. In those first 12 games of the season, he only had 5 points. So you are finding the back of the net. They are finding chemistry. They mixed up the lines a little bit, and I think that sort of clicked as well. So when your best players are playing better, the whole team is elevated, and then everybody else can sort of follow suit. That has been their biggest struggle. I think they're slowly starting to figure that out.
And how, if at all, has the mood around this team changed?
It's been really interesting to watch this season, a little bit painful at times to watch, because earlier in the season, they came in with high expectations and, of course, did not even come close to reaching those. And at one point through the stretch of losses and the struggle to kind of build chemistry, Jonathan Marchessault referred to the locker room as a little bit fragile. And it really was an honest assessment of where this locker room was. And you have veterans who have won Stanley Cups like Marchessault, like Stamkos, like Ryan O'Reilly. And all of those guys who have been so successful over the course of their career really were wrestling with, why isn't this working? I think going through that struggle and finding some success on the other side has really changed the locker room. It's much more upbeat. They're also adding some new players. Barry Trotz has added some pieces, but he's also recalling some players from the AHL who are making NHL debuts and are trying to see how they fit into the NHL program. And that brings a certain energy as well. So I think a combination of things and just finally being able to get some wins has helped a lot. Now they just need to add consistency in their winning.
That's the next step, obviously. Were you surprised Marchessault dropped the gloves against Calgary?
You know what is so funny? Jonathan Marchessault is a delightful person to cover, but he has an aura. I refer to him as like the Fonz. You don't really ever see Arthur Fonzarelli on Happy Days fight, but you know he's going to start the jukebox punch. And that's sort of Jonathan Marchessault. Like, you know he's tough, don't poke the bear. But we saw what happens when you poke the bear, and not much, doesn't have a big history of fighting in the NHL, because I just think he has an aura of don't touch me. But he can. And I have to tell you, his teammates were thrilled. They were thrilled to see it.
Yeah, and it was inspirational in the win over Calgary. So
Yeah.
more credit to Marchessault for inspiring his teammates in an unconventional way.
Yeah.
So now there was a recent, you talked about some players making their NHL debuts. There was a recent one, and it was a rather unique story. Talk to me about Azie Weeseblad.
Oh, this is such a great story, such a great player. Ozzy Wiesblatt made his NHL debut Friday night in Vancouver. That's the city he was born in. He played his second NHL game Saturday night in Calgary, the city in which he was raised. This is a really neat story. He is one of 5 siblings. He has 4 brothers. There are 4 boys and a girl. And Ozzy was born to parents who were deaf. And so when he was born, his first language and his siblings' first language was, of course, American Sign Language. And they were very fluent in that. But as the children got a little bit older, his mom, Kim, wanted them to develop socialization and, of course, to develop their speech. And she found sports was a great way to do that. So first they tried soccer, and then they just are natural athletes in this family. And so someone said, you need to try hockey. And Kim said, okay, hockey is too expensive. Well, they tried it out, and they are a very successful hockey family. All 4 boys play hockey at some level. And on Friday night, Ozzy Wiesblatt made his NHL debut. His mom, Kim, and 2 of his brothers and a sister got to see him make his NHL debut. And it was so great, not only just because of his interesting background story, but this is a player who has worked really, really hard to develop his game. His game is very physical, and he told us in training camp, part of that comes from the fact that he is one of 4 boys, and they played roller hockey in the backyard, and all rules were gone. So it just developed into a very physical player. He's also a really great offensive player. And so he was somebody who got to make that NHL debut. And it was just really exciting for everybody who knows him. And it was exciting for the team to get a look at his talent as well.
Do you think he'll stay up for the rest of the season, or what is his short-term future looking like?
That's such an interesting question with where the Nashville Predators are, because I think part of what we are going to see through the remainder of the season for the Predators is Barry Trotz checking out the talent that he has in the AHL. I would not be surprised to see some more games for Azie Weeseblad. Even if he is sent back to Milwaukee, I wouldn't be surprised if he is recalled again at other points in the season. I think Barry Trotz wants to get an eye on what he has in Milwaukee that is close to NHL ready, and to see where they're at.
That makes sense. So how does the team approach the second half? And look, the playoffs are obviously a long shot this year. It would take one heck of a streak to get them back into it. But who might be available at the trade deadline, and how do you think they'll approach that?
This is the $1,000,000 question. Right now, the Nashville Predators have very similar odds to make the first round of the playoffs or to get the first overall pick in the draft, which is not where they thought that they were going to be. And you already see Barry Trotz making some decisions based on what has happened in the first half of the season. He's making some cap space. I think the move to trade Alexander Carrier for Justin Barron with the Montreal Canadiens, that was really a cap space move. So you know that Barry Trotz is really looking to the future to see what he has going. I would not be surprised to see some other players available for trade. Nashville right now has a lot of depth, especially younger depth defensively. Name that we have heard in previous seasons that teams have been interested in is somebody like Jeremy Lauzon. So that may be somebody that Barry Trotz takes some calls about as well. So I think that there are some players that he would be willing to deal at the trade deadline. Of course, there are a lot of contracts on this roster that are not movable. So I think he's going to maybe move some pieces if he can. I also do think he wants to see what he has in the cupboard in Milwaukee. So we're going to see some more of those young players. He is making cap space. I wouldn't be surprised if he does do a little buying for a longer term piece as well. So that's something that we're keeping a close eye on. Names like Dylan Cousins has come up here in Nashville as well. So we're keeping an eye on that to see if Barry Trotz is maybe going to try to make a long-term move and also maybe move some pieces out as well.
I know it will be an interesting second half, and where the team goes after this year will be even more interesting because they are kind of at a crossroads right now. And why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast, where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Absolutely. So you can find us on your favorite podcasting platform, of course. Locked On Predators is also on YouTube. My co-host Emma Lingen is a writer for the Hockey News. You can find her work there. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well.
All right, Ann, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $250 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. And hockey fans, you could also use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to find some really exciting opportunities on the FanDuel app. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $250 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League.